Thank you for joining today. We are with Mark Lessleroth, President and CEO of BioPortUSA, helping life science company commercialize their technology here in the U.S. market. With decades of experience, Mark worked with global giants like Siemens and FedEx to bridge transatlantic trade and investment, but also small to medium-sized companies. So important to mention. He also a peer reviewer for the John Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and active in medtech circle across the USA and Europe. So get ready to hear from a leader who knows what it takes to navigate healthcare innovation across border. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Stefan, for this opportunity. I look forward to our discussion that will be forthcoming.
So who's Mark? Where are you from? How did you end up, in this business?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm originally from Germany. I'm the byproduct of a German mother and an American father who was stationed. So I think the term is army brat. My dad was a X-ray tech. My mom was a nurse. So you could say I grew up in a hospital. So it's something that
Yeah.
I've always been familiar with. But I wound up studying on both sides of the Atlantic. I got a degree from Lemoyne College, which is a small Jesuit school in Syracuse, New York. And then I subsequently got a master's degree from the Otto Friedrich Universität Bamberg. So that would be
Okay.
Bamberg, Germany. I think that's important for the story here because having the opportunity to live on both sides of the Atlantic, live, work, play, it gave me a better sense into the culture and in the
Hmm.
mindset. And there clearly are differences,
Oh,
not
yeah.
just between the Germans and the Americans, of course. I subsequently went to work in the advertising industry, in the area of business development, and I came to realize that creating connections between entities who may previously not have known each other but could benefit from one another is something I really enjoy doing. And so when the opportunity presented itself to do something in the life sciences, even though I don't have a strong medical background, I didn't at the time, I certainly learned the hard way. I took it. And so, as a result of a trip that the German American Chamber of Commerce out of Chicago organized in 2017, um, I came back with a partner and I said, you know what, we need to go ahead and find a way to help these international companies, these German companies, make their way into the US healthcare system. And that was, like I said, almost 8 years ago. And actually, it was, yeah, almost 8 years. It'll be 8 years in the fall. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Nice. So and it is true, because we do similar thing working with foreign company to enter the U.S. market, and it's amazing how there's it's not just a language issue. Sometimes it's more a cultural differences that make harder for some people in some country to understand the U.S. market. We're a little bit more fast paced. We don't take a full month vacation during summer. It's not the way it works here. But so why is the US market such an attractive yet challenging, opportunity for medical device manufacturer around the world?
Well, it's because it's the largest. Last year, I think the numbers were something like $3.2 trillion. It's the largest by far. I think the next biggest market, believe it or not, is Germany. It's not even China.
Hmm.
And that is less than got like 900 billion, I think. So
Yeah.
the attraction is the opportunity to make money because it's the largest market in the world. And I think speaking of culture, the U.S. healthcare market, while it does pose challenges, no doubt, but that's why we're here. It also enables people to introduce new kinds of technology where the acceptance may be slightly higher than in their home country, just because of the nature of who we are as Americans.
Yeah. Um, and when you look at it, because you're working with those companies to enter the US market, um, what are the most common mistakes you see foreign medtech company make when they planning their US market entry? What's the common denominator there that
Sure.
most of the time?
I think there's a couple of them. First of all, I don't think they truly understand, the opportunities that are here. Meaning, they're not doing the research that they should be, from a market standpoint, competitive standpoint, opportunity standpoint. There's a saying that I learned while working in this industry. Some people are brilliant at developing a technology, but did you build a solution for which there is no problem? That
Yeah.
happens.
Oh, yeah.
I think another issue is they don't have enough money. I don't think they realize how much money it really takes to successfully enter the market. And so what happens is they will start, but it will be a series of start, stop, start, stop, start, stop, or another American phrase, they are building the plane while flying it.
Yeah.
Well, if you visualize that, you can tell that that probably doesn't work too well either. And as a result, there are some amazing technologies that left to their own management, unfortunately, will never be commercialized in the United States because they'll either run out of money, or the American customer will run out of patience.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, but a lot of time they could have a success in Germany or in France or in Brazil, whatever they are made and they launch in that country and they have huge success. They try sometimes to replicate the success they had in one country to the US market. And it's so different that sometimes they fail because of that, because they can't, they're coming here with that impression that, they could replicate what they did in other market. Do you see that sometimes?
Oh, absolutely, all the time. And it's not even necessarily in a foreign market to them. It could be their own home country. So
Yeah.
they're developing a technology. They've rolled it out in Switzerland, for example, and they've achieved great success. And so they try to, like you said, replicate it. But the truth of the matter is you can't. And I
Yeah.
feel like I'm coming up with sayings today, but we're all familiar with the saying, "When in Rome, do as the Romans."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
look, the US market is very complex. It's very different than any other market in the world, in part because um, we are dealing with a capitalistic based market economy here. There's no universal health care like there is in so many other civilized, well, I shouldn't say civilized, first world countries.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts already. The
Yeah.
misunderstanding of saying, a European, I work predominantly with European medtech companies, although I've worked with some in Southeast Asia as well, and the Middle East. But many of them are focused on the technology itself, which makes a lot of sense. They don't necessarily look at what needs to happen for that technology to be adapted into the U.S. healthcare market. And money,
Yeah.
unfortunately, plays a big role. I've
Yeah.
said to some that if your technology can't help a U.S. customer make money or save money, you may want to reconsider.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you, well, you look at, what in your mind, what the key data should a company gather before deciding to launch a device in the US?
Oh, absolutely. I think, and it really surprises me that a lot of Europeans, who I think are historically known from a stereotypical standpoint to be very thorough in planning and strategizing, that they haven't done a lot of data collection in terms of looking at the market, but not just looking at the market and the competitive landscape, but actually doing some quantitative and qualitative analysis with their intended target audience. Get their feedback. I mean, if you
Yeah.
talk to enough people and they say, "Oh, yeah, I don't think so," or they go, "Well, this is great, but that's too expensive." That's just incredibly valuable information that the European company, whether it's an early stage company or a small to medium sized business,
Yeah.
could take advantage of in their
Yeah.
planning process. Um, and many of them don't. And so again, I go, you may find yourself going down a path where you're spending hundreds, if not millions of dollars on something that ultimately leads to failure because you didn't have a good enough sense of what the market was demanding and what you needed to do to give them what they're looking for.
Yeah. And what I see sometime, and because they will have they they will be on a convention, they will have a booth, and it's an international convention. They may be in Germany, they may be in France, they may be at Cersei, for example, in Barcelona, and they have physicians from the US come to their booth. They say, oh, they look at the product, they say, wow, we need this, and then they leave with that impression because a physician wants something that he will get it. And that's going to be easy. That's their port of entry, if I can say. And that's, I think, that's a huge mistake because you know better than me probably that that shift long time ago, that boats left the port a long time ago, where physician can decide what they want to use. It's not like that anymore because of the structure, how the US is made with those GPO, for example, where the administration, those value analysis will decide, if they're going to get a product or not because a physician wants a product that he will get it. And that's something that we see a lot of time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to just add on to what you're saying, most physicians in the United States now, they work in a hospital setting. They're an employee of the hospital. So
Yeah.
again, they may be, they may not be the ultimate decision maker, which is maybe confusing, or maybe why a foreign medtech company thinks they could have great success here. But let's not discount that they do have some influence. I think it is
Yeah.
important that if you have a doctor that you
Yes. You
meet,
need a champion.
you know,
Mm,
get his or her name, and
yeah.
remember it so that when you call on that hospital, you can say, "Hey, Doctor So and So definitely expressed a lot of interest in it." But
Yeah.
to your point, between value analysis committees, GPOs, other purchasing influences, the other thing is depending on what kind of product you're selling, you're going to go to market through distribution. You're not going to sell direct to the hospital. And because some of the largest distributors already have a relationship with the hospital, you're almost forced to go and work with the distributor, because if the hospital were to bypass the distributor to work with you as an individual company, um, that might cause trouble
Yeah.
with the distributor. The distributors have multi-million dollar contracts in place, and a hospital bypassing them because they're going to get a better deal could get them in trouble. And as a result, the hospital probably won't do
Yeah.
business with you directly. So that's something else to keep in mind. Again, depending on what kind of product or technology we're talking about.
Yeah. And one obstacle also that we see a lot of time is that people, foreign company don't realize that, but hospital in the US, about 80% of them, they still pay by check. So if you don't have a US entity, if you don't have an office, you don't have somebody who's going to get that check and do the deposit, it's a nightmare. So we do offer, invoicing services at our medical, but we did that because of that, because hospital, they pay by check. You don't see that in Canada. You don't see that in Europe.
Yeah,
People do a wire transfer or ACH transfer, not a check.
yeah, that's kind of funny, but keep in mind though, if you're going to register a product with the Food and Drug Administration, by law, the foreign company has to establish a U.S. legal business entity. So, but to your point, that's a mailbox number. That's not a human
Yeah,
being that's situated on this side of the Atlantic that's either helping from a sales and marketing standpoint or a customer service standpoint.
yeah, yeah,
And that's something that's also very important. But to your point, there are a lot of hurdles. The other thing that a lot of people don't think about is reimbursement.
yeah,
They're so fixated on the FDA. I go, guys, the FDA is a prerequisite to even start playing in the sandbox called the United States of
yeah,
America. But if you've developed a product that's not reimbursable in any way, shape, or form, no one's going to touch it,
yeah.
because again, I hate to say it, it's about money.
Yeah.
Um, so
And I think that's probably where we could, and that's not the intention here necessarily, but to divide those product in two big class, if I can say, those class one and class two, because if you have a class two with a 510K, there's already another product on the market, and there's probably already a CPT code, for that product to be used in a procedure. But all those other products, those de novo, you talk referring probably, and the class three who may not have, a reimbursement right
Mm.
now, that's a huge issue. And when people come to us because they're asking us to help them to find distributor, and one of the first questions they say, "Do you know what's the CPT? What's the reimbursement? What's the CPT code?" And they're like, "What's CPT code?" So
Right.
people don't know that's how the US market is reimbursed, unless a product will be cash payer because it's aesthetics or whatever it is. But that's a very small market of all the global medical, the
Right.
medtech market. So that's something effective to consider. A lot of people don't understand how the US gets reimbursed, those products get reimbursed. And it's a huge challenge.
Right. And so what happens is that so even if they do understand that there's a reimbursement element, they don't fully understand it. And let me give you an example. I was recently talking with a Swiss company that's developed a very cool software. So software is a medical device, but it's strictly utilized in the OR. Well, it falls under what's called a DRG, meaning the billing for the operation, the utilization of the room, it's all one price. So in this case, there is no separate CPT code or billing code or HCPCS for the software that could influence a hospital wanting to make that purchase. I mean, just to quantify or clarify, I think the reason or one of the reasons why the reimbursement codes are so important is that's how hospitals and physicians make money. You know,
Yeah.
they use these billing codes to then go ahead and bill the insurance industry and wait to get reimbursed. But in this case, the software didn't have a separate, and this was a very smart individual who'd spent 5 years in the United States. I think has a pretty good handle on the US market, but even he, didn't realize, oh, wait a second, and in a way, it's a good thing. Reimbursement is not on the table. He doesn't have to worry about it because of the nature of what this technology does.
Yeah.
So
Can you walk us through the market launch path checklist that you have? I think you have one, and why each step matters.
So thank you for bringing that up. Several years ago, when we started Bioport USA, we we felt the need to develop a roadmap, if you may, for companies that were actually interested in setting up shop here. So think about it. It's one thing to sell into the United States. It's another to sell from the United States. So selling into the
Yeah.
United States, it's really, I don't want to simplify, but it's an export proposition. You work with a distributor or an agent, or you have someone, and it's fairly straightforward. But if you establish a real office here and not just a post box address, hire someone, whether it's, let's say, a sales manager, for example, or maybe even an interim president for U.S. operations, which I think makes a lot of sense for a number of
Hmm.
reasons. We wanted to show what is it that you had to be mindful of. And so the launch pad takes someone through it's a venue that when we did it in person before COVID, we'd go on site. It would take about a day and a half to conduct with the senior leadership of the company. Post COVID or during COVID, we were able to do it over 3 days via Zoom. But we basically take a company through every element and every aspect of establishing a business here, and what are the things they need to be mindful of. So is it going to be a limited liability corporation? Is it going to be an S corp, a C corp?
Yeah.
What does that mean? How much cost is associated with it? If you hire someone, you need to be able to offer them benefits. Unless you make them an independent contractor or a 1099 employee. What does that mean? In most cases, though, you will have someone who acts as the employee or two. Um, you know, i- as the company grows, there are other things, especially if you if you go public. What are the things that you need to know again from a legal perspective and an insurance perspective? We then go on, and if they haven't gotten their regulatory approval, we talk about what happens in terms of developing the regulatory pathway. How do you go about getting FDA approval? If you understanding reimbursement. Where is it required? Where is it not? For example, if you sell a product to the U.S. military and or the Veterans Administration, which is a huge potential, you don't have to worry about reimbursement because you're dealing directly with the federal government. And that's could be perhaps part of your market entry strategy. We
Yeah.
talk about sales and marketing. What are the elements in which how you go about setting up sales? Do you wind up working with independent representatives? Do you hire full-time salespeople? How do they interact with distributors? How do you identify the right people? Branding and marketing. I I really get the impression that the United States developed branding and marketing. I mean, all you have to do is go to the middle of Times Square in New York City to see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But for those who get it, and I will say that there are a lot of American companies, especially small to medium-sized companies, that don't fully understand the power of branding and marketing as well. But if
Yeah.
you do, that's how you begin to not only get noticed in the marketplace, but that is also how you can increase the price of your products.
Yeah.
Because what people associate with something once that name has made a name for itself, and what's involved with it. In going back to the sales and marketing process, understanding how important it is to find the right key opinion leaders. Once you've had the product approved by the FDA, how are you introducing it to that particular target audience? Do you
Yeah.
have, the lead scientist who happens to be one of your KOLs introduce it at an industry conference to at least get the attention of the physicians in this case, and make them aware of what's there? What else, though,
Yeah.
can you do above and beyond that to generate, interest, awareness, trial, and ultimately purchasing it? So
Yeah.
it's a blueprint, if you may, that goes above and beyond just the commercialization plan. It's a blueprint for how you go about establishing a
Yeah.
U.S. business entity that will be fully operational to service the needs of the customers that you're hoping to gain in the United States.
So I guess you answer my next question that was about more what should a company consider when they're creating messaging for hospital clinician and purchasing decision maker, because I think, yeah, like you said, the hospital, the clinician, purchasing, the message should be different because they have different mindset of what they're looking at when they look at any product. So do you know, am I right?
To some extent, I mean, look, I think there's some common denominators that uh, the American healthcare professional looks for, whether it's a hospital or a physician's clinic. I mean, we do have those as well, where now it's a group of doctors that are making the decision on whether or not this product or technology makes sense. But, you know, um, it's something to the effect of, is it simple? Is it safe? And, is it affordable?
Yeah.
Or not even affordable, like, but is it, I hate to use the word cheap, but less expensive so that, we see they, meaning they can see where they can make money off of it.
Yeah.
I hate to admit it, but the whole economics of this does play a role. And I think that's one of the biggest differences behind or between doing business in the United States, at least in the healthcare industry, versus any other country in the world. And that goes back again to, who are we?
Yeah.
It's about capitalism. It's about making money. Um, I mean, during COVID, for example, we had a number of hospitals that had to be shut down and they were
Yeah.
never reopened. I
Yeah.
doubt very much that that would be the case in Europe. And for those hospitals that didn't shut down, they wound up closing certain departments, and most of them would close down the obstetrics department. So now, if I was a woman who was expecting to deliver a baby at a hospital 20 miles away, I might have to go 50 or 100 miles.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, welcome to America.
Well, and it a lot of time, foreign company see they look at the U.S. market and they say, "Oh, this is a huge market." Like you said, it's the biggest medical device market. It's rich. People have money, and there's insurance company, private, blah blah blah. So we're gonna make a lot of money very quickly. That's a lot of people mindset, because obviously, like we're discussing right now, they don't understand the market. But there's a real pressure in the healthcare system in the US for cheaper product because the reimbursement stay the same. And we're gonna face this situation. I don't want to go there, but with the tariff, we're gonna face this, where hospital will be faced with pricing go up. People don't think price is not gonna go up. Pricing gonna go up. But Medicare, Medicaid, insurance company, they're not gonna increase their reimbursement. They're
Right.
not. So, it's going to be challenging in the couple of next months for sure. Sorry, I don't want to talk about tariff, but it's so, I'm very passionate about it. But so from a market readiness perspective, I can say, how early should the company, be thinking about their FDA regulatory pathway?
Well, again, I want to go back to what I was saying earlier, that I think the very first thing an international life science company should do, if they seriously are considering the U.S. market and they think it makes sense, is make sure that there's a seat at the table for them. And that is to do a market landscape. That is, do an opportunity assessment, followed perhaps by a quantitative and qualitative analysis, which involves talking to the respective target customer that would benefit with, or they think would benefit from what their technology has to offer.
Okay.
If that all gets a green light, then frankly, you take that data and you develop your commercialization plan, which of course includes the regulatory pathway, figuring out, is it a 510(k), is it a de novo, does it need reimbursement, um, how is it priced, who's the target audience, how are we going to market. All of that goes into the plan, which again is something that I've noticed a lot of companies, for whatever reason, don't have, or they think they have what's a plan, but not really a plan, because
Yeah.
the plan also will, the ones that we develop at least, will have a pro forma P&L to show over the next 3 to 5 years, what is the anticipated cost of the operations, what is the anticipated revenue based on the pricing and the go to market pathway. This is all that one should consider before just saying, oh, you know what, I've got a good product. I'm just going to go and now I need to get FDA approval. Another big thing, Stefan, that I've noticed that virtually no company does or talks about, and I think it's very foolhardy, is to check their intellectual property. So what happens is they may register their patent with the US Patent Office. That's all well and good, but they really should do what's called either an IP landscape or an FTO, a freedom to operate. It doesn't cost that much money. And I think an FTO can be had for $20,000 or $25,000. That involves a law firm where they check to make sure that your IP, your patent, doesn't infringe in some way, shape, or form on someone else's that's already registered with the U.S. Patent Office. And you may recall last year there was a case where a big company, in this case Apple, and their Apple Watch, sure enough, they infringed on someone else's technology, and ultimately they settled outside of court for God knows how many hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Apple can afford that. A small, medium-sized company wishing to do business in the United States, they can't. And so to me, it doesn't take a lot. It certainly doesn't cost that much money, but it's a very important step that they should take
Yeah.
just to have certain reassurances. And I think what really baffles me is that almost everyone I've dealt with is extremely risk averse, coming from Europe. So one would think that to lower that risk, that they would do something as straightforward as doing an IP landscape or an FTO to make sure that their technology does not infringe on the competition.
Yeah. Is it applicable for even like a simple product, like a class one product where you just need to list your product with FDA? You don't have to get an approval or a clearance?
Yeah, I mean, class one, that becomes a numbers game. I'm not too
Yeah.
concerned about the IP of the class one. Class two is really where you, in class three for sure, you definitely need to look at it because of the intricacies associated with it. But for class one, it is a numbers game. I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to come into the market with a Me Too product, which, to be honest, nowadays is frowned upon by the Food and Drug Administration because there are already so many products on the market. Why does the US market need one more of this particular product. And, you know, the only
But
thing,
you know that the class one and class two are the majority of new product that entering the US market.
sure,
So there's probably, I don't know, 70, 80% of them are class one or class two with a 510K. So that's easy access to the US market because that's, even in class two or 510K, it's not that complicated to get.
right.
Class one is like you just list them, but there's a lot of those products year after year entering the US market and trying to make their
Right.
space there.
Well, again, I mean, true, but ultimately it doesn't even matter if it's class one or class two, or you get your 510K. I know of a lot of companies that have received their 510K, but then are unable to sell their product, not because of the lack of approval, but because the market isn't there or the people aren't buying it. And that's
Yeah.
where, if you do your research and you go, well, let me give you an example. So there's certain products out there that have high approval rating in the United States, but they cost a certain dollar amount. Um, I know Cologuard is one of those examples. So if you are at risk of colorectal cancer, you can take the Cologuard test. It costs a certain dollar amount, and here you go. And if you're insured, then you're in great shape because insurance will cover it. You have a copay, what have you. What if you had someone come in and develop almost an identical test, but instead of the out of pocket cost being $650, which I think is what Cologuard was at one point, the test now only costs $100. That could get interesting in a number of different ways in terms of how that product gets introduced into the US market. Meaning,
Yeah.
today, Cologuard, uh, there's really virtually no money for the physician. I mean, yeah, they write a script and they'll get a little money for that, but it's a take home test, and Cologuard is the one, and the lab is making the money. But at
Yeah.
$100 a test, now you begin to strategize, say, wait a second, maybe we can incorporate the doctor in the sales process. Now let him be empowered to sell the test and then use a different
Yeah.
lab. And I think there could be a market for that.
Yeah.
This is where you look at certain devices or certain technologies where there is a me too, but because of how it's priced, um, and the interest in that technology.
So class one and class two, there's a huge difference. People confuse sometimes, there was a definition of what where they should fit. We're gonna have another podcast on that, but it's something to consider. Obviously, you cannot claim in your marketing document, something that's not in line with do your classification of the product. What's the product code? If I want to go back to the current topic about also what labor or employment pitfalls should company avoid when hiring U.S. based staff or working with 1099 reps, for example?
Well, I think it really. I'm actually going to do a shout out to a company I was recently introduced to that I think the Europeans might really, really appreciate, so they don't have to deal with the headaches associated. Because what you're really dealing with is, a new type of employment system, HR benefits, what are they entitled to, etc. And there's a UK based company I was recently introduced to that's called Foothold USA, and they basically act as, this isn't 100% unique. I know some other companies that do this. And if I were a smaller company from outside the United States that was going to employ someone here, I probably would work with a third party company like Foothold, which basically takes responsibility for that employee. So the
Okay.
European medtech company would pay Foothold to a certain service fee, but then the person that gets hired and the benefits that that person receives would all ultimately run through Foothold. So the
Okay.
company itself is, that's one less headache that the company needs to worry about. And
Yeah.
I think that, we have another expression in English, penny wise, pound foolish. Sometimes trying to do it on your own because you think you're going to save some money isn't always the case.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said about not having to worry about um, all the small things that are important when you do hire someone.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I would do.
And it remind me when I was in pharma, there's a lot of those small company. We used to call that rent a rep. So it's just renting a rep, for a couple of months of years to sell you a product, and it was managed by a third party like this. I think it's an interesting concept. Uh, there's a lot in the US, depending on the type of product, depending of the therapeutic field. There's a lot of 1099 in the US. If I look at the spine or orthopedic, market, there's a lot of those 1099. And for people who not that, don't understand what it is, they're agent, a freelancer. I don't know how you would call it, but it's people,
Independent
they're not,
contractor.
yeah, there's not employee of the company, so they only do the sales part. Usually, they won't stock product, they won't invoice, they won't ship product. So, but they're very good at what they're doing, selling. Having
Right.
access, selling to customer, and then but somebody else needs to take over after, and that could be a
Well,
challenge for a
well,
lot of foreign
so
company.
let's break this down though. So you could hire a VP of sales and marketing and have that as a person who's an employee of the company. But the benefits and the insurance, disability insurance, unemployment insurance, all these wonderful HR related things would, in this case, run through a third party called Foothold America. Um, that individual then could go ahead and hire 1099s, right? To
Yeah,
say, because you really do want someone who's in control of the ship, so to
yeah,
speak, right? We have begun to offer interim VP sales and marketing or interim presidents of that company to just give the European company the stature of having someone here in a high level position that can help manage the process until enough revenue is generated to where they feel comfortable hiring that full time employee, including a president for U.S. operations.
yeah.
So,
And please, if you go that road, please don't parachute somebody from your country in the US. In my mind, have somebody who's here, who understand, who's, the market, who's been there, who's been in the industry, because it's a lot to learn,
yeah,
if you don't have that experience.
no,
Um,
I'm sorry. I totally agree with you because that happens a lot too. That someone will send someone from Germany or Finland or Switzerland
yeah,
over here to run it because that's who they trust.
yeah,
Trust definitely plays a big role in all this. But I say to them, I said, you know what? I think you're wasting your money because that individual at the end of the day may not be fully knowledgeable of all the things that they should be in order to assure that you have, a smooth transition, if you may, of getting the business sold, not the business, but the product sold from the business in
yeah,
the United States.
yeah, yeah. And it makes a huge difference to have somebody here in the US who's taking care of the US itself. We we do have experience with other company where you say, well, you know what, we want you, that are medical, to do everything, and they don't want to get involved. I say, "Ah, that's not going to work." The rate of success will be very low. You as a foreign company, you need to be actively involved. You cannot let the distributor do everything and thinking that, okay, they bought some product, we're good. It's not going to work.
So,
It could
so
work in a very small, but on the long term, it's not going to work.
No, and that's part of the I have to laugh. I remember meeting a German medical device company that was so excited to have signed a distributor as a result of meeting them at Medica. And Medica, for those who are listening, it's the world's largest medical device show. It takes place in Dusseldorf, Germany every year, shortly before Thanksgiving.
We're
And
going to be
anyway, but
there.
6 months after, the German med device company didn't have any orders. And the German was like, "What's going on?" And I would say, "Well, what did you do to help support that distributor?" And he looked at me like, "What are you talking about?" I said, just because you have an agreement with someone to sell something, I don't want to say they're inherently lazy, but they're going to look
Mm,
for you, the manufacturer, to help open up, opportunities and or provide them with sales and marketing materials, support them at conferences or trade shows, help them with, let's say, a road show, depending, on what makes sense to roll out the product. You're trying to roll
yeah,
out something brand new into the market, and that's just not how it works.
yeah,
This might be an opportune time too to just touch base on what you were saying earlier because of the times we are facing right now with tariffs.
yeah,
I was recently on a call with the CEO of the Swiss American Chamber of Commerce, and of course, Switzerland's facing 39% tariffs, while Europe is facing 20%. And of course, that's definitely very disconcerting to the Swiss.
yeah,
And I made them aware of the FTCs, the foreign trade zones, which I know you're familiar with, where
yeah,
you're not going to avoid the 39% tariff, Mr. Switzerland, but because of the foreign trade zone, once your product gets shipped into it, you will only be taxed the 39% once your product is sold. And there's
yeah,
something to be said for that. It gives you time to negotiate what it is that you're going to do, how much of it, are you going to swallow versus the distributor, wherever you're selling it to. And so I do want to point that out that people need to realize that there is an option to at least mitigate the pain a little bit
yeah.
by defaulting to an FTZ until the product gets sold.
To that, because the USMCA trade is still in place. So that trade between Mexico, US, and Canada is still valid. Even if the tariff, for example, with Canada would be 25%, if your product is 100%, and it's very important, 100% made in Canada, no other parts, tiny parts, nothing, 100%, then you can still have the zero tariff,
Right.
on your medical device. Because if we have to remember, because people confuse a lot that tariff now is on the medical device. It's not. There's no tariff on the medical device. It's a tariff on the country.
Right.
Because if you look at your Chapter 90 on the for the tariff, they're all 0% for medical devices. But because they're adding a tariff on the country, people think, oh, now there's a tariff on medical device. No, it's about the country. If in 2 years with the new election and the power change and things change, it could go back to what it was before. Who knows? But again, as you can see, I'm very passionate about this topic. But yeah, the USMCA is still valid. So as you said, there's could be some way around in the meantime, but it's gonna hurt, the patient down the road, obviously, because there's no way that those tariffs will be absorbed by us as a distributor, for example. I'm
No.
not gonna, absorb 30%. Sometimes it's my margin. So why would I do that? So
Right.
if a lot of people like that don't provide those product anymore to an hospital, so the hospital will have to turn around and pay more for for similar product, and that's gonna hurt, down the road, the patient, at the end
Well,
of the day.
you bring up an interesting point because as the price, in the consumer world, if Walmart is importing things from China and there's a higher tariff, ultimately, Walmart might absorb some of it, but ultimately it's the customer who shops at Walmart, let's say for that TV or that computer or whatever, that they're going to have to pay 25, 30% more.
Yeah,
A patient doesn't necessarily pay 25. If the patient's insured, the patient has a copay that's been already, and it's been already established between the patient, and the insurance providers that they've signed up with. So now all of a sudden it costs the hospital 25% more to do a certain surgery. And you mentioned earlier in our conversation, well, that doesn't mean that Medicare and Medicaid or any of the private payers will automatically reimburse 25% more. So that will be interesting to see how that unfolds in the near future.
yeah, yeah. I want to touch about compliance a little bit. How can companies proactively avoid those litigation or compliance issues that could delay or derail their entire launch of their product here in the US?
Well, here again, I think is if you're working with someone, either you hire someone as a full time person, or you work with someone in the United States who's very knowledgeable with compliance and all the things that go along with it, so that you're not going to run into these problems. There's a
Yeah,
series of checks and balances, and I think what happens all too often, Stefan, is that again, international, but I work predominantly with Europeans. They look at certain things that appear very black and white. The FDA. How hard can it be to submit, an application to the FDA? Well, there's a lot of gray. It isn't as black and white. And compliance
yeah,
is the same thing. Like you need to think about, what are the potential issues that you could run into ahead of time. And the other thing that can happen is if you're not 100% sure, you can always ask the FDA ahead of time,
yeah.
through a pre-sub. So, that happens a lot where we want to make 100% sure, that we know that we get the questions answered so that we don't run into any issues down the road.
You're talking about reaching out to the FDA. I want to put you in the spot here. Me, what you're thinking about all those cuts that they're doing with the CDC and the FDA? Do you think that's going to slow down those review or response from the FDA?
Here's a problem. There's a lot of chatter that goes on, or a lot of talk in the media. Last I checked, though, the reality of it is today, that may change tomorrow. Things are still more or less on track. And
Yeah,
and I think sometimes people in general are influenced by what they hear in the media and influenced in a negative way, meaning, well, maybe I
yeah,
shouldn't do this at this point in time.
yeah,
And I say to those people, until you've talked to someone who's working with the FDA, including Bioport USA, don't listen to the media. Don't listen to what you read or hear, because as of right now, things are still pretty much on track,
yeah.
business as usual.
And I'm always amazed, and I have to uh, kudos to the FDA, the people working there, because they're always nice. They always answer, in a normal delay. And it's amazing. I think they're doing a great job. So I think for now, you're right. I don't see a real impact right now.
No.
We'll see a couple of months, but for now, it seems that maybe there's they're going crazy in that office over there. But for now, they're still doing a good job.
So
Yeah,
no, but I think this is an important part, or to share with you as well. In Europe, you have the MDR, and we are seeing an influx of people in Europe coming to the States first, not because we're the largest market, but because it appears to be easier to get FDA clearance
yeah,
than
yeah,
it is MDR approval.
yeah,
And so far it looks like the Europeans have not figured out how to solve the problem. By not having enough certifying bodies in place, and there's such a
yes,
backlog of
yeah.
companies with their technology that needs MDR approval. So, what's a company to do? Well, why not come to the United States? And we're starting to see
Yeah.
that happen more and more.
Yeah, because you're right. You go back 15 years ago, people were launching in Italy, in Europe, before the US. And now it's switched totally, of which is good for us as a consultant, but I saw that change happening, obviously. Um, so before closing, what exactly Bioport USA can do for small to medium sized foreign company who wants to enter the US market?
Well, it's interesting you should ask because I discussed this earlier with someone out of Los Angeles, and I said, the concept of a one stop shop is something that to many, unfortunately, seems unbelievable. But the truth of the matter is, Bioport USA really is a one stop shop. We have the tools and we have the resources in place to help a company identify whether or not their product is viable for the US market through some of the market research that I shared with you earlier. Check the IP, develop the regulatory pathway, put a commercialization plan in place, make sure that reimbursement is all set, and then begin to look at, what is your regulatory, not your regulatory, your sales strategy. How do you go to market? Even all the way through to what's your exit going to be? Are you going to go
Yeah.
IPO at some point in time? Are you going to want to sell to a large strategic? We're very well connected. Our network is fairly expansive. And again, we have all the resources in house to be able to help that company, which translates into us helping a foreign medtech company get into the US market faster, more efficient, and less expensive.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And at the end of the podcast, we're gonna add the information about your company, how to reach out to you. This will be posted on YouTube and on LinkedIn and other platforms. You can follow us. As a reminder, that our medical also pretend to be, a one-stop shop, but we're doing everything that you don't do. So it will kind of an extension of you, and we like to refer, customer to you when we feel that what they, maybe they don't understand the market access, the market strategy or the reimbursement, and that's not what we do. We do importation, we do warehousing, we do distribution, we do invoicing, we do a lot of the thing when they are ready to enter the US market. That's where we step in. But all the work before that should be done, that sometimes they don't do. I think it's such a
Right.
good thing to have the experience of Bioport USA and work with you guys. Um, Anything else before we close?
I mean, you bring up a good point in terms of how we complement each other, and so I think on that note, I think it's important for these international medtech companies to not go it alone. It's very,
Yeah,
very difficult. There are many challenges. I equate it to someone trying to climb Mount Everest. And if you don't have a Sherpa with you, chances are you won't make it to the summit.
yeah,
And so, I just ask people to be a little bit more open minded to what we outside consultants can bring to the table, not just from a strategic standpoint, but also from an execution standpoint.
yeah. And trust the consultant that you work here in the US. Trust them, because we see that sometimes people say, I will try myself. And then you look at them, 2 years after, and they're gone.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, just trust and invest that money up front. You could be saving a lot of money down the road. I know for a small to medium size, it's hard. And I understand some of our customers, they're two, three, five people in that company. So money is always, an issue where they're going to invest. But, plan this in advance to have
Right.
money aside to work with you guys, for example, to make sure that they're on the right path. And then they come to us, and then they're ready, and then we can help them.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. See you next time. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.